In this video, I'm going to walk you through other packages that you can use to output tables and graphs. And how I would sort of think about these is if there is something that you want to output, maybe you can go find a way to make this happen. And so these are ways to give you those options. Each of the packages has its unique languages and syntax and things that you need to change for it. I will try and keep it as simple as possible here, and then there isn't enough time to become an expert in these things, so I just want to give you the simplest approaches, and then you can explore it more on your own if you're interested, and I'm happy to help you if you need some of that help. So the ones we're going to use simply here are Plotly, FlexTable, CableExtra, and ggpubr. So those are the four we're going to use in this script, and then there will be another script for the ShinyR. And each of those do something different, and so I'll talk through those as we go through. We're going to be using the same data set we've been using for several videos. As a reminder, this is company information with total assets, sales growth, ROA, ROE, so several things in there. The first one we're going to do is Plotly. There are a bunch of options here. Plotly is primarily designed for doing plots that are interactive. Lots of options. We're going to start with a plot that we've already used in the past. This is just a histogram from ggplot. I've added things to make it look a little nicer. But if we run just this part, you can see the plot that it creates. This is the natural log of total assets, this histogram. And I just changed some theme and other parts of it and titling, but other than that, it's the same thing. The really easiest way to do this is we save the ggplot object here. So I'm going to save it as something called G. Notice now that object shows up over here, and now we can just call Plotly by using ggplot as ggplotly. Of course, there are other things that are available, but we're going to stick with the simplest version. So any plot that you have output here, use ggplotly. It's going to put that into a format that we can use that's interactive. So we run that. I'm going to open it in Zoom here so you can see it. And it gives some interesting output and gives us some interactive ability here. Notice that, or something to be aware of, is that you put this into a PDF document, you lose all of this interactivity. So it's limited to the type of thing that you would output. So we might put this into an HTML file or a dashboard. Those are where we might think about these things. We will do some of this in the dashboard, but let's look at sort of the interactivity. So if we hover on things, you can see this particular one it's the log of total assets of 7.649, and there are 3,000 plus observations in this particular column. There are some other things we can do. We can zoom in to a particular section, and now we're looking at just this one spot. Of course, I have a graph that isn't that interesting, but we could zoom into something that that might be interesting there. And we can do a few other things. We can move it around, right? Pan it, double click to get out of it. We can select things, and there are a few other things, options we can take. But in general, it allows us to hover and see some of the information and do some zooming in and dragging. So any ggplot you can throw in here and do. If you want to explore other plotting options, it does provide a few more plots that in sort of a simple way that are kind of nice. So, all right. So that's the first one. The next one we're going to do is ggpubr. There, you can look this up. So notice in each of these places I gave you a getting started place. You can also just search this online to learn about Plotly. Here we have one that is ggpubr. This has lots of options for getting, it's supposed to be publication ready graphs, and lots of features to it. We're just going to use one of those just so you can sort of be exposed to the possibilities. Here we're going to save the same graph here, but we're going to do sales growth instead of total assets. Notice I'm saving it as a G2, so a different object. And I'm just changing the names here, sales growth instead of total assets. So I'm going to save that object. And we can run it and see now it's sales growth instead of total assets. It looks a little different. So the function we're going to use from the ggpubr, again, there are many things you can do with it. I'm just going to show you a convenient one, and then you can explore on your own if you would like to do more. There is this ggarrange function, and in that is arranging different plots. So here I'm going to use the G object and the G2 object. That's two ggplot objects that we've saved. And then there are options related to this. We'll just do two that are convenient here. So labels, you can label each plot something. So plot A, plot B is what I'm using here. You can do more than two graphs. I'm just using two graphs. So you could do, for example, 4 or more. And then we're going to do how many columns on a page and how many rows on a page. So if you wanted to put a 4x4 set of graphs, you could do that. Here I'm just doing two columns. So, well, you know, the left-hand side and right-hand side columns and one row. I'll make an adjustment so you can see what other things might look like. But we run this, and now it'll place the graphs together on the same graph. So plot A, plot B, the same graphs you saw before, but now they're the left-hand side and the right-hand side. If we wanted to mess around with that some more, I'm not going to give you other plots, but let's just repeat it again. And let's say we name them, you know, something similar. And now let's say we wanted 2 columns and 2 rows. We can repeat the same thing here. And we have a 4-part graph. Of course, they're the same, so it's not that interesting. But so this is a simple way to sort of prepare some graphs. Of course, there are other options. You know, feel free to go look into those. We will come back to a graph in just a minute, but now we're going to turn to some tables. So we've dealt with data and cleaning up data and analyzing data. The problem is then how do we get that out into a nice format that we might want to use? So for example, if I I'm doing a project and I want to list the 10 top employees, then how do I put that out into a table that I can then use? So there are, again, lots of ways to do this. I'm just going to give you 2 of the most flexible. The reason I'm giving you 2 is these 2, one will work depending on one output you're going to use, another will work depending on other output you're going to use. The most sort of straightforward one would be the flex table is based on some LaTeX underlying information. So this works, or sorry, I forgot which one does which. Maybe it's the other way around. Well, I'll have to try it and show you. But one of them is that works great for HTML output. The other works great for PDF output. And you can make them work for either one, but it's a little more straightforward in one than the other. So depending on the output and the syntax you like, you could do either one. So let me just walk through a couple of those things. So I'm going to create a table, and I'm just going to remove all of these missing values from ROA and sales growth. For each year, I'm going to calculate the mean and the standard deviation of those 2, ROA and sales growth. And I'm going to create a table here. So if we go over here to out, notice we have this table that's each year, the mean, the standard deviation of each of these items. So how do we get this out? Well, there are a number of ways. So ways that we've already seen, we can just type out here, and it's going to give us some output. Doesn't look too awesome, but at least it gives us something. We could copy and paste, which can be a little bit tedious, or we can use something like these packages. So if we use flex table, we need to install the flex table package, of course. We do flex table. That's just going to create a table that outputs, this is HTML output, and it gives us a nice table here. Of course, it doesn't all look pretty, so we could just use this, but if we want to get it ready to use or maybe publish or put in a report or something, then there are things we can do to make it look better. My advice here is this is trial and error. You find something that you want to do and then go look up how to do it, and then eventually you can get some sort of template that you use most of the time. So I'm going to introduce you to some of the ones that I use most of the time, and then you can go on and try and find other things about it. Again, here is a place to look, but you can also just search this online as well, but this explains some of these things for you. So flex table out, so this is the same thing we had up here. Notice that's the same thing up here. Now we're just going to add things to it, and the way to do that is with the pipe function, as we did before. So with anything within the flex table, we can add with these pipe functions. So one would be to set the caption. That means the title or the description. So that's just set caption, add in the title. So we can do parts of it, but I'll show you in a little bit. Then the theme vanilla, there are different themes you can use. I don't tend to use a whole lot of different themes, but you can search up themes for flex table as well. Then these are the parts that I use more often. This is set header labels. So what do I want to put? So notice we have these here. What do I want to call those rather than just use the column names? So here I'm going to call F year is equal to year, MN ROA, I'm just going to call means, SD ROA, standard deviation, similarly across those. So that's just going to rename these here. And you can add other headers above that. So this add header row, that's going to add something above what we have here. And the column widths is how many of these columns to use. So if you do one, it's just going to use this column right here, the F year column. If you do two, it'll do F year and the next column, right? So you can do groups of columns or single columns. So here I'm going to do column widths 1, 2, 2. So the first one's going to be 1 here. Then the second one is going to be these two, and then the last one is going to be these two. Then values is the name that you're going to have put there. The first one I'm leaving blank. That's the one that just has one column. Then ROA and sales growth will be the 2 column ones. So let's go ahead and work with these ones, and you can see what comes out of that. So now notice it's starting to look a little nicer, we have the caption or the title here. We have a column ROA and sales growth that deal with these 2 columns, and we have different named columns here. Of course, there's still some things we don't like maybe. Year shouldn't have a comma, and we have lots of digits because it includes everything that's in there, so we can change some of those things. So align here, I refers to row, J refers to column. So in the I row, the first row, center whatever is there, and part, so we can do part all, part header. So I want to center the header. This one we could center, we can align everything. So if I just center the header on the first row, notice it has moved the header here to the center of these 2 parts, right? Because it has this column, then these 2 columns, and these 2 columns. Well, it's centered it in those 2 columns. That's looking nicer. Then if J is for column, so the first column, I want to align that left, and I want to align all of it. So we're getting better here. Then we can also format cells and columns and rows. So here I'm going to do column format _ num. I can do I or J's. Here I'm going to do J equals 1. That is the first column. Big mark, so that means what the big number, so in between these hundreds values. I'm going to have it be nothing. So empty parentheses would be nothing. So it's not going to have the comma there. You could put a space. You could put other things. But we run that. We've taken care of that. Now for columns 2 through 5, that would be 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to round to this 2 digits rather than this big long thing. So run that. And now we have something that looks like a table that I might go ahead and use for publishing or a report or something. That seems like a whole lot of work, actually. But once you have these sort of things set up before, then it becomes much easier later. And you don't always, once you have your format too, you don't have to keep jumping in and out of different packages and different versions. But I'm just trying to show you how this all works. All right, so there we go. There's a table you can use. We can also put this into our documents or dashboards or other things like that. So then there's Cable Extra, which is a different package based on some other inputs. Let me just walk you through the basic thing too. So we can do the simplest one. And notice this one is the LaTeX one, or this is the HTML version. Okay, so it's given us an version that we can't even read, right? Well, if we change a few things, so now let's do this one. Now it's changed a little bit more, so not anything you can really tell. Now let's walk through and sort of align a couple of these things. So, well, let me give you a couple that'll be easier here. Cable Classic is a certain way of outputting it. Again, there we go. Finally, so the Cable Classic, what it does is make it a certain format and then puts it over here so we can see it. Otherwise, so notice what we have over here. So if you're going to put this into a HTML table, we could just copy this here, copy and paste it into an HTML file, or the Cable Classic will do it over here for us. So when we get down to the bottom, of course, I guess I could move this up higher so we could see it. This is the way to output it. Well, then notice everything else. This is the only thing I've added on here. Everything else goes within the cable function, and I'm not adding anything new. There are other, the header I am, but everything else I'm not. So it's set up just slightly differently. Of course, there are a few other ways to do this, but let me walk through what I think is the simplest way. These are ones I use all the time. So I guess I use cable and flex table just about the same, but let me walk through these ones that I think are really common and fast. So call.names, that's the column names. We just name the columns, and that's really easy, right? So if we just do this, well, I don't know. I don't want to keep changing things. So we can just run this. If we ran up to here, we would see these names change. Caption, same thing, give the title. Digits is the rounding, so we can just put in digits and a list of how many digits to do for each column. So here I'm doing 0 digits, 2, 2, 2, 2. So 2, 2, 2, 2. Then we can align them. So again, a list of things we're going to align: left, center, 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 center. And then we can add a header above. So this all we could run. So let's go ahead and run this so you can see. Oh, I forgot to add this other part. Sorry, let's do this. Then this part here. So now it's done all of everything except for this header part. So it starts to look like something we could use. If we want to add this header above, this is the format to do it. So we're going to create a list here, and we're going to do empty for 1 column, ROA for 2 columns, and sales growth for 2 columns, and then finally this last part. So all I'm trying to do is replicate basically what we had before. All right, so there we go. So now this is sort of like what we had before. Of course, you can keep changing some things, but to me, this is a pretty good basic approach to output a table. So we've got two different types of ways to output tables. We've got a few different graphing types. So far, so good. And I'm happy to help you with on any of these, but a way to do it is just start trying, and then you'll quickly develop your particular set of options. Then the other thing we want to work with, and we've seen this before, is what's called a Shiny app, and these are interactive in the sense of you can select something and then it's going to change what the output is. We can do these on a dashboard or an individual app. Here I'm going to do it as an individual app, and you have to create it that way. If we do it within the dashboard, we'll eliminate a few things, but it's significantly different from what we have here. So I want to sort of mentally break here, and then we can look at how we do these Shiny apps. So this is the Shiny app. Let me walk through a few things about this. So first, we can go here and do File, New File, and we can open Shiny Web App. You name it, sort of what you want it to be. It's going to create it somewhere. We click Create, and it will give you a template just like we had before. So notice it says you need the library Shiny. That's the one that you're going to use to create all of these things. And then it has some of the default things that we need. So we need a user interface. That's typically done as UI. And it's this fluid page. That's the function. And user interface has to have what you're going to input. That's this part here. The sidebar layout is what we're going to use as the input. The output, this is plot output here. There are different outputs here. There are different inputs you can use. So here it says a slider input and a plot output, but all of this goes into this fluid page, which is the user interface. Then behind the user interface is what's called a server, and we need this function to take some sort of input, create some sort of output, and then feed this into this user interface. So I guess I'll walk through a little bit here too. So what goes as input and what comes as output, how you refer to these are here. So output, $, whatever that object is, and same thing up here, we're going to create an input that is going to be named here bins. So down here you'll say that input, so we should see something down here that shows input, and it's telling us input bins. Well, here input bins, this comes from the input, which is part of this function here, and comes from up here. And it is this inputs, and the thing we're going to input is this bins. Well, this is just, it's a character string that is related to whatever we decide to do here. So here it's going to create a list of these that it's going to use for the histograms. I'll show you a different way that we're going to use it that, at least for us, I think is pretty common. Then it creates this histogram. Well, this histogram then is going to become the output. And so whatever ends down here is going to be the thing that comes out of this. So then we're going to, up here, once we do this, we look up here. Notice this is dist plot. Well, that comes here. So output dist plot is the object that we're going to use here. And it's using this render plot. So rendering is what has to happen for this to work. So these are dynamic objects. So it's going, there are different things. There can be a render plot, render table, render other things. So here we're going to render a plot. And when you render a plot, what has to come out of there is some sort of plot. So here we're rendering a plot that gets put into this distribution plot, which then comes out here. So inputs are replacing some sort of character thing in your code, and the output is what comes out of all of that, which is through some function like a render plot function, and all of this comes out of a server. So it's kind of a mess here. Then when you get up here, this is what you will input, and what will come out of that comes from the output of this server. Once you do all of this, then it creates this Shiny app with the Shiny app function, which is create the user interface and the server, and we're naming them UI and server. So once you have all of this set up, the hard part is, you make a change and it doesn't work. There isn't like check each piece. So we run the app, and this is the default. I mean, this is the template. So notice I changed something. It's changing how many bins it's going to use in the histogram. So let's see how we can turn this into something that we can use, maybe in something that we're more familiar with. So what I did is do the same setup from the template, and then I'm changing some things. So let's start at the top. We're using the tidyverse, so we needed that in there as well. And we're reading in the data set. So this is the same data set we've been using. We're going to use the tidyverse set of packages to do a couple of other things. Now let's walk through and see what I changed here on the user interface. So change the title. Now I'm just going to call it histogram. Before it said slider input. So the sidebar layout and the sidebar panel is just about the layout of the Shiny app. It could have a different layout. It doesn't have to have the sidebar, but this is, we're not going to go through all of the options that are possible here. This seems pretty common. And then the main panel is where the output is. Output, well, all of this is just on the structure of the Fluid page. The part that really matters here is this slider input and what's going into it. Well, slider input is one of those. Select input is another. You can go look up in the Shiny, let's go ahead and pull this up here. If you search for Shiny R or Shiny in RStudio, you will get to a web page that sort of talks about this, and you can read about how to do Shiny. You can look at some examples. Let's look at some examples. It'll take you through some different ones that other people have done, and then you can use those as your starting template, for example. Of course, some of you have learned this sort of thing in something like Power BI. Frankly, that's going to be way easier to figure out because you already know that. But if this were something that you were going to develop over a while, then this might be useful for you. Okay, let me walk through again here a few things. So I changed the title here. Now I have a select input rather than a slider input, and you have to look up what that select input would be or what it requires, but first you have to tell it what that object is going to be. So when that comes out, the input is going to be called select column. That's what that is. The label is just what it's going to say where you put it. And then the choices are a list of choices that you can choose from. So total assets, sales growth, and ROA. I'm going to use it to choose a column to use. And the default is what is selected. So default, when it first opens, it's going to be total assets. Okay, main output, I'm going to call it histplot. Basically the same as it was before. Before it said distplot. I'm just naming it something different when it comes out. Now let's go through the server. This is where all the work is done, right? This is the input and output, then all the work gets done down here. So I still have render plot. That means at the end of this, what's going to come out is a plot. And that's going to be the output histplot. Well, notice that's what gets used up here, histplot. And we have to use some sort of function here, render table, render plot. Here we're using render plot. And now I can just do some code that gets me to the plot that I want to get to, so let's walk through this. There is a slight challenge, is that what that input comes as is a text or a character, so it won't actually select a column. We need to use it in a way that we could use that text. So it's not actual data, or like a data set or something. There are lots of ways to do this. In this other app, how they did it was to use it to create down here input of bins. So this is going to create a character of how many bins to put in here, and it's in a function. So the real thing we need to do in most cases is take this, whatever that input is, and use it in some sort of function, so then it'll turn it into data we can actually use. Other ways to do it, but I think this is the easiest. So how we're going to use it then is to take the function and turn it into something. So I want to turn it into this variable that I'm going to create. I'm going to take the data set. I'm going to select only this input column that I selected. Well, in the data set, then there's one column, but it's not named select column, so then I'm just going to work around this a little bit. So I'm going to do the quantile to get the low and the high, which I'll show you in just a minute, but how I'm going to address it is use that variable output, which is one column, but it's a data frame, and I'm just going to take the first column. So this is all rows, first column, which there's only one column. So the same thing here I'm going to do. I'm going to get the low as the 5th percentile and the high as the 95th percentile. And that I'm going to use that to not look at the whole, outliers and everything. Then this is going to be almost all the same on the histogram stuff we would have seen before. These are just options to make the histogram look nicely, or look nice. The couple of differences here, notice I'm going to set a limit. Xlim is the low limit and the high limit on the histogram that I'm going to use. So I'm only going to graph from the 5th to the 95th percentile. And the other part, input to that graph, is the X variable is variable. That's that data frame, the first column of that data frame. So a lot of work here going on. The main part is we have to use the input in some sort of function to output some data we're going to use. Then we have to call that data. There are other ways to do it. This seemed the easiest to me this time. Then we're going to do some plotting or something. Then at the end, it's all the same. Okay? I think the only way to sort of get a handle on this is try a different graph, try something else. Once you have it, it's not that difficult, but it takes a little bit of finagling at the beginning. Okay, so once we do this, we can run the app. It's going to go through. Notice it has this select a certain column. So if I open it all the way, you notice it's the left-hand side. This is the sorry, I forgot what it's called again. Oh, the sidebar. When it's like this and we don't see it, puts the sidebar at the top. But when we open it all the way, this is the sidebar. This is the main panel. And if it starts at total assets and gives me a graph of total assets. If I do sales growth, notice it gives me a histogram of the sales growth. Well, why does it look so nice? It's because I've removed missing values and infinites, and I've gotten rid of the tails here by the bin width. By the limits. But once you have that, you can select any of these, and it creates a histogram that then you could look through and look at the different histograms for each of those. So this is sort of unlimited in the types of things you could do. Lots of ways to approach it. Of course, you can publish this in the end. Our studio creates some places you can put it. You can open it directly in a browser, which will do the same thing, but you could share that with someone if you wanted. And that's it. Okay, so the hard part here is, so again, notice this is an app, it's a standalone thing. You run the app and use it, and you can save it in that way. For you to even try it, like to use what I had, then you need to change what this input is. Other than that, it will run. Or you can use the template and sort of work from there. All right, so let's go back to everything here. So we have a bunch of different things. So we have the um, two different plotting ones, the Plotly and the ggpub-r. We have the Flex table and the Cable Extra. Then we have the Shiny app, and what we will then do later is start incorporating these into some of the documents. And again, I'm happy to help you. I know it's a lot to throw at you all at once. What I mainly want to do is let you see all of these options and sort of try some of them so that in the future you can use them and come back to it if you're interested. All right.